masterclass is our time to set the intention for mastery. Only one who devotes herself to a cause with her whole strength and soul can be a true master. For this reason, mastery demands all of a person. Our agenda today is threefold. We first are going to explore DNA activation. And even though we've talked about Lightbody activation before, you'll find in today's masterclass, I have this image of a dahlia, which is a flower that I love. In this dahlia, there are many layers of petals, and I want you to think of DNA activation and attunement like that dahlia. And here you see the dahlia blown up in red. You notice that the petals toward the center are smaller, and often they are a different shade of color, and the petals on the outside are much larger and even a different shape. It is only through experiencing the fullness of the flower that we can understand its perfection. And so the same is true for our DNA activation and attunement process. There are many layers to this process, and each of these masterclasses is an attempt to help you to look at one layer. And so we're never trying to figure everything out at once. Instead, we're just looking at the layers one by one. And today we're breaking these layers down geometrically, and we are exploring how they work together for healing. We're going to begin by exploring DNA activation. Then we're going to explore what it really means to be attuned to the rays. And then we move into an introduction to epigenetics. Each of these topics we're going to continue to explore in this masterclass series. So today is an introduction to another layer of the parts of our process. And with that in mind, let's begin. We're going to start today by looking at the connection between these three parts of our process: activation, attunement, and epigenetics. This together, the relationship between our activation, our attunement, and our epigenome form the framework of the DNA healing process. You can see here that this tetrahedron that is emanating from the center of our slide is anchoring these three parts of our process in place. And I like you to think of this activation and attunement and epigenetic process like an exercise program, where our activation that we are going to explore right now is our strength training. Our attunement is our cardio, and the epigenetics is our diet. Epigenetics ultimately helps us best to understand the science of DNA activation and attunement, because it explores the science of our environment, our diet, our relationship to our meditation practice, and even our energy healing practice, as we will explore. And so here you'll find an even more thorough explanation of how we can vision each of these parts of the process as an exercise program. So our activation is what we're focused on today. This occurs through attention to form. So we activate our DNA through the attention to our form. So think of when you strength train, that is like a sit-up or a push-up or lifting a weight. You must first study proper form before you begin the exercise in order for the repetition of that exercise to have the desired outcome. The same is true for our activation process. Next is attunement. attunement occurs through attention to presence. So think of when you are running, or even when you are on a brisk walk. You are deeply attuned to your feet on the ground, your breath, your simple presence in that moment. And there is a clarity that comes when you return to that place over and over again in the light of the attunements. And what you'll find is that both the activation and the attunement, although they occur through these different places, through form as opposed to presence, we have the same process to work with both of those energetic places, and that is through daily exercises, including a variation of bringing our attention to the light through the repetition of breath work, meditation, energy healing, and hypnosis. And this is because these tools that we are using, breath work, meditation, energy healing, and hypnosis, they merge form with presence. And so in the act of healing itself, the activation and the attunement become one. They are only separate here for our brains to understand what is happening. But in the healing experience, there is a merging of the activation and the attunement of our form and our presence. And that is where the depth of our healing occurs. And epigenetics you want to think of as your diet. Your diet not just being your food, but everything you're surrounded by, your environment, the substances you put into your body, your community, your daily habits, your actual physical exercise routine, media, and relationships. So we're going to look at all three parts of that process. But right now we're focused on activation. That's where we're going to start. We're going to explore this process of activation and what does it mean to activate our light bodies. That is where we start. Through attention to our form within our breath work, within our meditation, energy healing, and hypnotic healing experiences that we move through. We begin this activation process with a knowing that miracles arise out of the light, and light and strength are one. And so as we bring our attention to the light, we inherently gain this strength that is automatic. Like, you don't have to actually lift a weight. Instead, the weightlifting is bringing your attention to the light. And strength then is born from the repetition of our attention. And there is this real relationship then between the activation and the attunement process that we want to remember, but we still practice our strength training before our cardio, meaning that we focus on form before we really expect too much out of our presence. Sometimes it's hard to be really present unless you have the form down. Imagine if you know what it feels like to get in the zone doing any kind of exercise, it's hard to get in the zone like the first time that you do it unless you have a natural physical gift in that area. But you have to normally, if I think of someone like Serena Williams, she's a great example. She practices every day for years to get into that zone. And her practice is more focused on form so that when she is in the court, she can really be present because that form is ingrained in her through her training. And so think of activation and attunement in that same way. We train first in form, then we can open fully in our presence, in the center of our healing experiences. And at the center of all of this is the star tetrahedron. The star tetrahedron is the geometric form that is the symbol that really symbolizes what is happening and also is an anchor in many ways and a vibrational healing tool. But however, when you look at it just like this, sitting flat on a piece of paper, it has little purpose, but it is very much a key. And understanding the tetrahedron, it gives us really a key to understanding what DNA activation and attunement, specifically what it means to activate our DNA. That happens through attention to the tetrahedron, the star tetrahedron. And so we can learn a little by studying the shape of the star tetrahedron and also how ancient cultures used it and understood the use of these shapes. So we're going to just take a few moments and explore the history of the star tetrahedron, specifically in Jewish mysticism, because that is where we have learned the most about the form of the star tetrahedron and its purpose in our healing process. So there is actually a form of early Jewish mysticism that is called Merkaba mysticism. It was an early school of Jewish mysticism that was also known as chariot mysticism. It was born and it evolved in the early part of the century, 100 BCE, which is before 0 or Christ, to 1000 CE. So right around what we know to be the birth and death of Jesus Christ, there were these spiritual teaching that came out before modern religion. And Merkaba mysticism was one of them. Merkaba mysticism teaches the ascent to the throne of God. Merkaba specifically is a Hebrew word that translates into a thing to ride in. It derived from the consonantal root RKB, which means to ride. If we go back to what we know the Hebrew translations of Mer, Ka, and Ba to be, they represent light, spirit, and body. The word Merkaba understood to be a chariot to reach the throne of God. Much of this school of Merkaba mysticism, much of its teachings were founded upon the vision of Ezekiel. So this is Ezekiel's vision of the chariot. And this was an early Jewish mystic prophet who had a vision of a chariot that would take you to the throne of God. It was a chariot that was made of heavenly beings that were driven by the likeness of man. And so what you see here in this image are 4 beings. They're facing the 4 directions, north, south, east, and west. They have the face of a man, an ox, a lion, and an eagle. There are also 4 angels there. Each has 4 wings and 4 faces. And what you'll also see is what looks like 2 interlocking wheels, which are spinning. And what we know about these spinning wheels is that they are often the symbols of our chakra centers were depicted as wheels spinning. So this is an interlocking spinning wheel. You see here reaching down from the clouds out from the throne is this, looks like paper, but what we know from is that the Book of Light is the book that all of those that believe and follow the light, their name is written in that book. And it is those beings whose names are written in the Book of Light that will ascend to the throne of God. And so this is very symbolic of that record of those who are the believers in the light. And that symbolism is here too. And also interesting to note that there's like a city that looks like it's on fire in the background. So this seems increasingly relevant for the moment in time that we have right now and where we should be putting our focus, which is ascending to that inner throne of God through these tools. So if we continue to look at where the tetrahedron evolved into after that. So after the earliest schools of Jewish mysticism, we see the tetrahedron reappear over and over again. Here it is in the Seal of Solomon, and it gave him the power to command demons and spirits and to speak with animals. Solomon was a king, and it was known that he had this seal inscribed on his ring, and so he carried this with him wherever he went. It was known to be a protective force, and it then evolved into the Star of David. So this is the symbol of modern Jewish identity, this Star of David. And it's also known as the Shield of David. And although we don't see this spinning star tetrahedron, we do see the actual shape and form of the star tetrahedron that symbolizes the core of the Jewish teachings and ultimately the protection that you have when you believe. So if we bring these symbols together, if we look at these earliest symbols, the modern depictions of them, and I set this up when I was a teacher a long time ago, we had these worksheets that we gave the kids when it was like a vacation day, and you may have gotten these as a kid, and it was like pictographs, and I was a history teacher, so it's like we were helping kids to understand things like ancient language and how it evolved. And we would have worksheets where it was like a chair plus a fish plus a water droplet equaled like Neptune or something like that. And so there was a real way, anyways, that our ancestors used pictures. And when you break that down and explain it to kids, it helps you realize that there was a real simplicity to what they were doing. And if we can look with that same simple mindset at all of this, we can see that there's a real connection between the star tetrahedron, the spinning chariot, the belief in focus on the light, and the divine nature of all, and how that union is surrounding the throne of God. And how this translates then into our healing work is that what we know as Merkaba, our light, our focus on the light, our focus on spirit, and our attention to our body, that is the essential process that we are going through in this DNA activation and attunement process. Now, if we look at what the original translation of Merkaba is, I put that translation first. So Mer is light, Ba is body, Ka is spirit. For our purposes, we still look at Mer as light, but for Ba, we bring our attention to our breath as it connects to our body. And for Ka, we focus our minds on spirit. So we use our focus and our attention and bring it to spirit. And it's through this threefold process that we activate our DNA. And the final point I want to make here is that the study of the Merkaba was limited and prohibited from discussing in public. It was only entrusted to those that went through spiritual training and were of a certain age. And so there's much of what we are learning that was protected because it was believed that there needed to be a gatekeeper to God, which is really how modern religion evolved. And these tools teach us a direct route to God, which is so fascinating that it's so protected. And now is the first time that this is really becoming accessible to those of us that are using it for healing. I want to share with you how I came into this. So I am being trained in the priesthood. This priesthood teaches of a dual role of the king and the priest, or in my case, the queen and the priestess, because I am training in a priestesshood. This is really a training in working with the light, the divinity that is at the center of the light. What I've learned through this process, and what you have ultimately already know so far if you've gone through any of the healing experiences, is that at the center of this DNA activation attunement process, we are reattuning our attention over and over again to the virtues within us, to the virtuous qualities of our soul. We are in these healing spaces, letting go of lower vibrations and tuning into higher vibrational frequencies over and over and over again. Righteousness in this way is really, I like the word virtue. Like, virtue is righteous, and when we tune into that virtue over and over again, we activate our light body. Now, I came into this priestess training through my work with chakra healing. So ultimately, I was searching for a training to work with the 7 rays of light. And I found that training existed in this priestess program that I'm moving through. And what I've learned in that path is that crystalline DNA, which is how I first understood what happens to our DNA. It crystallizes, and there is a crystallinity that occurs, which also activates our DNA. So the activation and the crystallization of our DNA are one and the same, and it occurs through the repetition of virtuous thoughts, through awareness to our innocence, our purity, and our essential natures as master beings of love and light, or on the love and the light within us. As we bring our attention back over and over to the love and the light within us, this crystallization occurs. And so chakra healing teaches that the essence of the god and the goddess, the queen and the priestess, is within us. This is all then very connected. And what I want to leave you with here is that however you have come here, whatever path has brought you here, there is a connection between the roots of this tradition, the specific practice that we are moving through right now, and where you are at in your own personal evolution of working with energy and light. And there is a magic that happens in the middle of all of that. May this inspire you to honor that place within yourself. If we come back then to the Merkaba, this activation occurs through our connection to all 3, through simultaneously bringing our attention to the light, to our breath, and focusing on spirit. And I want you to think of your breath is where we're starting. So if you can't focus today, or you're having trouble finding the light, you want to know that we begin with our breath. The focus is the key to opening the door. You are going to focus in different ways. In the beginning of this process, you're just focusing on the light. Then we actually do begin visualizing the star tetrahedron. We focus on the geometric symbol that is the star tetrahedron. And together, that opens the door to the activation. The light leads us into the activation like an open door. And we need all this combination of breathing with focus on the light in order for the activation to occur. The how of our framework is our breath, our focus on the light. That is how we, in very simple words, that is how we activate our DNA, through breathing and bringing our focused attention to the light. With what are we going to do that? Well, specifically, we're using a specific breath work technique, and we're combining that with hypnosis, energy healing, and meditation. These are our tools that we are using with our breath and our focus and the light. Our tools, what we are using, are these specific practices. So when we bring all of that together, we have this synergy that is occurring. It is with our repetitious attention that the spinning of our Merkaba light field begins, or the activation of our DNA begins, because that activation of our DNA stimulates the spinning of our Merkaba light field. The final part of this process that you want to remember is that we want to bring our attention to the results over the outcomes. It's less important to try to get yourself to look like a perfectly spinning light body, or whatever that means for you, whatever your vision is of your light body fully activated. Like, let go of that outcome that you're seeking and just focus on the daily results that are tangible, the way that you feel, your connection to your breath, and your mental and emotional and physical state first. Bring your attention to those results and release, especially in the beginning, a need for any specific outcome. And remember that it's the relationship between all that creates the healing. This DNA framework, then, to recap, connects the activation, attunement, and the epigenetics, the science of our environment. Through the connection of all three of these forces, we activate our light bodies. Each of these practices has their own individual activation process. We're not only activating all three, but we're going into each and we're completing an individual activation process. All of that together brings us into this synergetic. Remember, this light is within each of us and within every part of our web of humanity and all of life itself on earth. As we focus on the light through our breath, we begin this process. Maintaining this process is a requirement for Merkaba activation. Through our focus on the light, through our breath, through our attunement to the 7 rays of light, our DNA crystallizes. We experience crystalline DNA. Our DNA activates and attunes to the light. This process also activates your light body, your crystalline light body, and is the activation of the electromagnetic field as well that surrounds you. Your crystalline light body is both born already, it exists already, and it's created in each moment. Once activated, your Merkaba is a high vibrational energetic portal of light. It attracts negative particles of energy and transmutes them into higher frequencies. Once we activate our light body, this form acts as a shield, protecting us, and a vibrational force that raises us up. Our attention determines our frequency. As we return our focus to our hypnotic practice, our meditation with the sacred geometric symbols, our energy healing, through attention to sound, we come into alignment with this light. Our breath creates pathways and activates the frequencies of light. Through our breath and attention, we merge with the frequencies of divine light and bring them into our own bodies. Our attention to the light brings us into alignment with the crystalline frequencies that surround our beautiful Mother Earth. I want to leave you with this story about when I first started this DNA activation attunement process, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to commit my life to it. And I was at the beach often, and I had a real connection with the whales at the time, and I really felt the whales suffering deeply. Like, it was at the time when there were just lots of whales that had washed up on shore, that were affected by like pollution and overfishing. And my heart was hurting, and I really was at the water's edge, and I felt the presence of the whales there, and I asked them, like, what should I be doing with my life, and how can I help? and I heard clearly DNA activation and attunement. And it was like, it was crazy because I wasn't expecting that. And in that moment, I felt the whales communicating to me, and they showed me this sonar, and it was like a field of light that was radiating out from the source of light that we work with in our healing. So from my healing work, I saw this sonar, and it was radiating out, and it was touching so many people. And they showed me that we all are in the process of raising our consciousness to come up with solutions. And my job is to raise the consciousness and to help participate in that raising of consciousness. And this will happen through this DNA activation and attunement. And I felt that message strong. And this image here really visualizes, or really encapsulates, that vision of the potential that we all have when we align with real intention to this light within and activate our own fields and then connect to one another. I think there are many problems that exist on earth that can dissolve in this light when we have the courage to come together and hold this frequency together.